This is an audio recording of the LendIt Fintech Weekly News Show. The show is streamed live on LendIt TV, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter at 5 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday. In this fast-paced show, the LendIt News team and a special guest discuss the most important fintech news stories of the past week. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to LendIt Fintech's Weekly News Roundup. My name is Peter Renton, Chairman and Co-founder of LendIt Fintech, and as always, I'm joined by Todd Anderson. How are you doing, Todd?
Well, Peter, how are you?
I'm doing great, and in honor of what we're calling really Latin American FinTech Week here, it's we have Andres Fontao from Finnovista. How are you doing, Andres?
Peter, Todd, hello. Great to see you guys again. Congratulations on the event this week. It was really good to see you guys and the whole fintech ecosystem in person this week in Miami.
Yep. Well, as Andres just said, we hosted LendIt Fintech LatAm this week. I'm actually still in Miami in my hotel room here. We wanted to get Andres on. He's one of the foremost experts in Latin American fintech, and we have the biggest story in the history of Latin American fintech this week. So, Andres, before we get going, why don't you do a quick intro about yourself and your company?
Great. Yeah. So I'm the co-founder, managing partner at Finnovista. We've been around the Latin America fintech scene since 2012. And really our focus is threefold. One, summits and insights, generating a lot of research, a lot of insights in terms of the evolution of the fintech ecosystem in Latin America. We do a lot of work with corporates across the region, helping them innovate with fintech startups. And we're also an early stage investor, currently fundraising Fund 2 to continue our work in pre-seed and seed investments across the region.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's get to it. It's the biggest news of the week. I would argue the biggest news of the year just for fintech globally. And that is the Nubank IPO. It is now the biggest fintech IPO in history, and it priced yesterday at $9 a share. Opened today, I believe, was around $11.25. Closed at $10.33, up 15% on the day. I mean, it's been exciting. Everyone was talking about it all the time this week at our event in Miami, but. Andres, why don't you kick us off? Give us your thoughts. You've been following Nubank, certainly longer than Todd and myself. Give us your thoughts on the company.
Yeah, Peter. So definitely, I think it's certainly a historic day, a historic milestone globally. I know digital banks across the globe have their eyes set on this IPO, right? Also for their potential listings in the capital markets. But I think for Latin America especially, it's a very exciting day. The best thing about this, I think, right, is that we're still at the very beginning of a digital revolution in Latin America. Right? David, he said it himself. Last year, he was interviewed by The Economist, right? And I think we're still at that moment, right? We're still in the first minute of the first half of a 90-minute soccer match, right? There's so much more to transform and disrupt digitally, right, within the financial services space in Latin America, and what the Nubank IPO is doing, right, is really just bringing the fintech opportunity to the forefront, right, of the masses, not only in Brazil, not only in Latin America, but it's really it's making fintech become a household concept, right, in Brazil and Latin America and across the board. I think I think for Latin America, right, in addition to the impact, the positive impact that it can have for startups and for investors that are currently operating in the region, right? I think we also have to look at the Nubank IPO as an inspiration to future entrepreneurs and to future investors, right? And we saw this happen here in the U.S. with PayPal, right, and the PayPal mafia, who then went on to build new startups, and some of them went on to build their own VC funds. It happened in Latin America already with Mercado Libre, right? And I certainly think that Nubank and the IPO is going to have this impact in Brazil and in Latin America, right? And it's going to inspire future fintech entrepreneurs and future fintech investors, right, to move forward, seeing that there is a more clearer path to exit and to success for them, and at the same time bring greater impact to the region.
Yep. So, Todd, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I was struck by what a lot of people at our event were saying. I mean, Sergio's the one that made the funny comment that I light a candle every night and pray that Nubank has a successful listing. I think the more interesting thing, I think, Andres, you touched on it there at the end, is, this gives the entire region more than the current IPOs that went, which is dLocal and Stone. This gives them that kind of shining thing on the hill, like, all right, this is the company that we're aiming towards, which is important for a region that's still, I think when I was interviewing the CFO at dLocal, Sumita Pandit, how we talked about, does LatAm still have a discount to it on the world kind of stage when it comes to fintech? You have the lending clubs in the US, you have Revolut came out of Europe, you have PayPal now. It's seen as kind of the fintech darling, but LatAm was still kind of the step down. But Nubank's not a step down. Nubank's kind of like a step up for a lot of these companies, and it's LatAm focused. So I think that can help change the equation and the cascading effects of those that are early in Nubank that are going to start. There'll be some successes and failures from that, and then they'll cascade from there. And so it'll just keep on having this effect years over years that can really, rewrite, the LatAm market. The only negative, I guess, downside is if it bombs. And we won't know this for months or probably a year because, not everything's viewed in 10 seconds these days, though a lot of things are. When it comes to company performance, I think we're going to need time to see, as long as it holds near that value, I think we can call it a success, as long as it doesn't precipitously drop.
Yeah. And right now, obviously, it's been trading for a grand total, I think, of less than 3 hours. It did rise a little, drop a little, but right now at the end of the day, it's worth $48 billion, and which is interesting number because they had, in their last disclosure, they said they had 48 million customers, so that's $1,000 per customer as their valuation. And just a couple of little asides here. David Velez, the CEO and founder, he's now worth $10 billion. He owns 23% of the company. And Christina, I don't know how to say your last name. Christina is now a billionaire, one of the other co-founders. You can help me with the last name there, Andres.
Cristina Junqueira.
Yes, there you go. I won't even try.
So I'd add one more relevant fact, right? That I've been reading on in the press today, in the days leading up to the IPO, right? And that they are the most highly valued, right, bank, publicly listed bank in Brazil right now. So their valuation is even greater than Itaú, right? Which I think was up until today the largest, the most highest valued financial institution.
Which I think that is truly staggering to me, where you've got really established, profitable banks that have been overshadowed by a fintech company that didn't exist 9 years ago.
But at the same time, and I was watching David Solomon be interviewed the other day on CNBC. How many fintechs right now can you say are profitable?
Right. Well, I mean, they say that Nubank just turned to profit very recently. So yeah, they're not. It's all about the future.
But I think it plays with what Andres was initially started with, which is this is the first inning of a 90-minute match. That this is so early, and over time we're going to see, does Nubank become the bank in LatAm? Does Revolut become the global digital bank that kind of breaks through from Europe to the US, across the ocean and continents? Does Lending Club continue to perform after they bought a bank? There's so many different pieces, and I think sometimes we get lost in that fintech has changed a lot. It's very, very small still.
But I think it's got
No,
potential to grow.
Well, yeah, it's got huge potential to grow, and I think that coinciding with what's happening in Web 3.0 is now you have this like, dual trajectory of two things happening at the same time, which is fintech helping to reshape financial services, and then you have this entire new ecosystem potentially helping to reshape how we think about a lot of different things beyond just financial services.
Right. And I think that's the thing that, go back to what Frank Rotman said, that there's a lot of market cap that is inside the traditional banks right now. And a lot of that is going to shift to the fintechs. And that's what investors are getting on. But before we move on, just one last thing, Andres. I mean, you've been following Nubank for many, many years. What is it that you think makes them special?
Yeah. I think it's two things, right? One has to do with their product and value proposition, right? And it's the fact that, they're the first truly, native digital financial institution in the region, right? And I think that says a lot about the product, their offering, and the culture that they're building internally as a company, but also externally to their community and to their customers, right? The second is that they're truly a regional player, right? David founded the company in Brazil, but he's from Colombia, and he spent time living in other countries in the region, right? And then he studied in the U.S., and then he moved to Brazil. They're currently operating in Brazil, in Colombia, and in Mexico, right? So again, I think they're not a standalone Brazilian fintech. They're a truly regional play, right? And I think time will also tell, right? How successful their expansion can be. Have they built a standalone value proposition for Brazil that they're just trying to copycat and export to other countries? Or are they going to be successful in Colombia, in Mexico, and in other countries?
And isn't this the first company, at least financial services company, that said, here's who the banks are serving, which is the rich, the powerful, the kind of high class, upper class. And here comes David Valdez and the team at Nubank, and now it's the bank for ordinary people, for the middle class type person, and the banks. I mean, worse than even here in the U.S., the banks in LatAm, from what I understand, don't serve the everyday person almost at all.
Right. Well, we just, Todd, it's great that you bring it up. We just published some research this week with the Inter-American Development Bank and with the Pacific Alliance, right? So basically Mexico, Colombia, Chile, the governments of Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Peru. And we did our typical fintech radar mappings for those 4 countries, which we've been doing for years. But this time around, we also surveyed incumbents, right? And there are 3 segments that the incumbents identified as not priority for them. Right? And not surprisingly, it's the segments that fintechs are addressing, right? It's micro enterprises, small and medium-sized enterprises, and low-income consumers, right? I think each of those segments individually, less than 3% of the incumbents who responded to our survey, right, identified those segments as priority to them, right? So obviously, they're focusing on what you just said, right? The higher end consumers. They're focusing on the higher end SMEs and corporates, right? And they're not concerned about the masses, right? And that's where Nubank and others, right, have really identified an opportunity to solve specific pain points of consumers, of customers, right? And that's where the opportunity is. The entrepreneurs are seeing it, and the investors are seeing it.
Okay, well, let's move on. We are going to stay with Latin America, but before we do, I want to just touch on other news that happened this week. We had the crypto executives testifying before the House Financial Services Committee. We had executives from Coinbase, Circle, FTX, Paxos, Stellar, and Bitfury. The latter company there now, Brian Brooks, CEO, former OCC head. And so that was a really interesting day yesterday, and it was mainly a fact-finding like discussion. There wasn't any massive news that came out of it. The Democrats were skeptical and the Republicans were supportive in general. And it was interesting. The crypto executives, when interviewed afterwards, said they were pretty happy with the hearing, but feel like this is. The US is trying to wrap their heads around crypto regulation, and at least they're talking to the people who matter. What are your thoughts?
No, keep in mind we're 1 month away from an election year.
Right.
So you're really talking about 23, 24 where this might get solved.
Right.
Because I am very skeptical that these sides come together when they're fighting, and the margins in Congress are very small right now, both on the Senate and the House side, that they're just going to come together and say, yeah, let's find common ground for crypto. There's no chance of that happening. So it's going to be left to probably the SEC, and those to kind of begin to craft things, but that they have looked towards Congress. So it's kind of this. It's being bounced back and forth between the two. And the scariest thing for me, if I would be a crypto executive right now, is that you could be looking at waiting until post midterm, so 23 or potentially 24, depending on who gets into the White House, before you get real clarity. Now, you might get some incremental clarity, but I just don't foresee it happening in the next 12 months with the way Washington is currently working.
Oh, yeah. I think 12 months is optimistic. I mean, they even said, particularly when they said what they'd really like is new legislation specifically targeted at them. And that creating a new law, which I think is actually a good idea, but that's really going to be hard to get those people on the same page. It's really going to be tough. So, Andres, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't followed that news very, very closely. I would say, right, just throwing it back to Latin America, Mexico went through a similar exercise not too long ago, and they, 2 years ago, they adopted the Mexican fintech law, which was something, at the time, the frame, first of its kind in the region. I think the effects of that, right? Some people like the law, some people don't like the law, right? I think we're always going to come across polarizing opinions, right, about a framework in itself. It's very hard to appease to everybody, right? But what I will say is that it's brought certainty to the market, right? And so if we see from when the Mexican framework, when the Mexican fintech law was adopted, what we've seen is greater certainty, meaning there's been more investment, flowing towards fintechs in Mexico since then. Investors like certainty. There's been greater consumer adoption as well, right? Because they like certainty, right? It gives them greater peace of mind, specifically as it applies to their savings, right, to their wealth.
Right.
So I think any conversation that's headed in the direction, right, of bringing greater certainty to the ecosystem should be well received, right? We're never going to find the perfect law, the perfect legislation, right? But it's a starting point, right? And it's a building block, right, to eventually get there.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. Certainty is the name of the game. That's what these crypto execs really want something. Tell us how you want us to be regulated. Just tell us, and then we'll
I do think, though, this is the one industry, and I think this is a pipe dream personally, but Web 3.0 is where there should be like kind of a special global regulatory, kind of coming together because of how drastic it can be for things beyond just financial services. The entire, kind of remaking of the internet, I think would be something that, if it ever were to happen, which I would never think it would, but that's something where it kind of goes beyond borders. Where a global consensus would be just, it would be great, game changing. Yeah. But I foresee it never happening. So.
That goes against the whole concept of decentralized finance, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on. I want to go back to Latin America. Actually, I want to touch on your interview, Andres. You kicked off our event with interviewing Sergio Furio, who is the CEO and founder of Creditas, one of the largest lenders in Brazil. And that was interesting that he was actually somewhat controversial, I thought, in saying that expanding into a new country is not a good idea for most companies. He said, and he's an interesting guy because he is Spanish, moved to Brazil, where he didn't even speak the real language that well when he moved there, and then now he's operating in Mexico as well, and he made it sound like, man, this has been brutal. It's been really hard to expand, and not something that other fintech companies would do, and that we heard many others with the opposing view. What are your thoughts, Andres?
Yeah, I think expansion is tough, right? And I think when we work with early stage entrepreneurs, we make them know this, right? And I think the biggest hurdle is regulatory, right? We've been talking about that a little already today on those conversations here in Washington. But each country has its different. It has a separate. If they have one, it's a different regulatory framework, right? And so these fintechs that are operating in regulated spaces, right, have to know that. And so that in itself, right, is just costly, right, and it consumes a lot of resources, a lot of energy. When we look at Mexico or Brazil, they're large enough companies, right, where at least at the early stage, startups should be focusing standalone in those markets, right, because the opportunity is big enough, right, and not until they've really nailed, right, that market opportunity in their home country should they even think about, right, expanding geographically. That being said, right, companies like Creditas, right, they've obviously been doing very well in Brazil. They've nailed their value proposition. They're growing, and they're healthy enough from a financial perspective, and they have the backing to be able to expand, right? So I think when fintechs do get to a certain size, they should definitely look at it. We tend to prefer, obviously, Mexico or Brazil as standalone markets, just because of the size of those countries, the population, and the opportunity warrants it, right? But when you're talking about smaller countries, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, you do have to, yes, do focus on validating your product market fit in country, but know that you have to think regionally from day one, right? That being said, don't assume that it's going to be a copy paste approach from what you did and what was successful in country A to country B.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to move on to our most popular keynote of the week was Credit Justo, the CEO of Credit Justo, or co-CEO David Poritz. He spoke about acquiring a bank. That's something that Credit Justo acquired a Mexican bank earlier this year. They closed a transaction. They've now been operating with that bank and have seems to be doing pretty well. Interesting. That there was, I think there was like 25, 30 questions that came in from the audience on this session. He got off stage and was mobbed by there was a line of people wanting to talk with him. So, clearly there's a lot of interest in Latin America, particularly in Mexico, it seems, but probably across the region, that buying a bank is something that gives you regulatory certainty and it gives you cheaper cost of capital. Those are two pretty big advantages, it seems.
I thought the most interesting thing he said was when examining the cost of capital from an investor versus the cost of acquiring a bank, that in I think it was the medium to long term, he's like, the bank was clear,
right,
that that pain to get the bank was definitively worth it than maybe a bit of an easier path, but clearly a more expensive path in working with institutional investors to get capital. So I thought it was fascinating. And Peter, you said it, 25 plus questions. It's a complicated transaction, and people kept asking about the details of it. And he was more than willing to share almost every single question related to how they completed the transaction.
Yeah, I really think it's amazing what David and Alan have achieved so far, right? And I think just to think about their journey, right? And, they launched Credit Justo as the monoliner, right? Just SME financing in Mexico, right? But as they've built their customer base and identified their customer needs, they've been able to roll out, right? Really a full suite of services and products, right, to address their customer needs. And buying a bank is, I think, the pinnacle, right, of this, right, in evolving from a single product to a one-stop shop to service all of your needs, right? Like you guys said, it brings regulatory credibility, right? I think it's very important for the customer, right? They don't see Credit Justo now just as an alternative lender, right? But they see Credit Justo as a financial institution who can really help serve their financial needs, right? Whether it be in lending or another product, right? I don't know if this came out. I wasn't lucky enough to sit in on the session with David, But they also acquired some fintechs this year. They acquired Señor Pago, which is a mobile point of sale provider in Mexico. They also acquired Visor, right, which is more of a business intelligence provider in the SME space. And again, right, this is, I think, just in line with building out a full suite of services and becoming that one-stop shop for their customers. Really amazing what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, my favorite session of the week was actually, and that was yours as well, Todd, Paulo Pisoni of SoftBank. He really is. He's an amazing speaker. He runs SoftBank's Latin American fund. I think it's $5 billion, or it's a massive fund. And one thing he said that it hadn't occurred to me, and I didn't even think about this. He said VC penetration as a percentage of GDP. He said Latin America now is catching up, or has caught up, with the US and Europe, which I thought was, and we showed in our opening presentation, we showed the CB Insight slide that shows Latin America, just it's exponential. It's like between the first 9 months of this year, there was like 3.1 times the amount of 2020. And so really, you just had the Nubank IPO with another $2.6 billion that was raised. So massive amounts of capital being raised. And, he got 60 portfolio companies, and really he has become really a kingmaker in some ways in Latin America.
I thought the best part of his session was when he talked about founders and the board seats, and basically saying founders don't take enough time to craft, like it's their company. And a lot of times they acquire an investor, they raise a bunch of capital, and they kind of throw a board seat to that investor. And he was like, that you need to like put your foot down. This is your board. You need to put it together in a way that's going to benefit the company most long term. And so I thought that piece of insight I thought was besides the funny anecdotes that he had, which made the session kind of laugh out loud at times. I thought that piece was super interesting. That a lot of founders just don't put enough effort into crafting a board the way they truly want. And he encouraged more founders to do it. He gave the story about how he was interviewed for an hour and a half after he had given a term sheet to the company, and he eventually got the board seat. But the founder was very attuned to, this is my board, and I'm going to put it together in a way that most benefits the company's long-term vision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely think for Latin America, I think for the startup ecosystem in general, but specifically for fintech, where it's the highest, the largest segment attracting VC money, right? It is this year, obviously, but it's been so for the last few years. But I think SoftBank entering Latin America, that's where we can really talk about an inflection point. There's a before and an after, right? Obviously, they've brought a lot of capital. They've put Latin America on the radar for lots of other global funds. But like you guys just said, right, they're also bringing best practices, right? Best practices that are relevant to other VCs, but they're more relevant to the entrepreneurs themselves, right? And just being able to guide them with tips and tricks on, how to form your board, right, are very important, right? Venture capital in Latin America 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, right, wasn't as mature or sophisticated. Hence, the VCs that did exist, right? Many were local, and many weren't applying these best practices. And many, we're trying to strangle the entrepreneurs, right? With power, with voting rights, et cetera, right? And it's good that someone like SoftBank comes in and says, no, like, it's your startup, you have to maintain control, right? In different ways. So yeah, definitely, I think everyone's excited. That's when SoftBank arrived. Everyone's even more excited that they're still around and that they're continuing to bet on the region. Obviously, fintech is a big part of that. And this year, they started going in at earlier stages, right? It's going to impact valuations. And some people probably aren't as excited about that because they do have very deep pockets.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's only going to help evolve and mature the investment ecosystem in across the entire region.
Right. Well, we're almost out of time, but I want to end with it was our Pitch It winner of our startup competition. Jave, not Yave. It's spelled Yave, but apparently pronounced Jave. And this is basically embedded finance platform for home mortgages. Seemed a little bit like Blend for the US. And I didn't realize in Mexico, the 5 largest banks control 98% of the mortgage market. That is just staggering. It feels like a disruption just waiting to happen. But anyway, did you know Jave before, Andres?
I had not, right? And that's, I think one of the reasons I love going to these conferences is discovering that early stage talent on stage, right? I think, initiatives like Pitch It, I think are what would drive me, and I think attract a lot of audiences to go and discover, right, that emerging talent in the fintech industry in the region. But it's a huge opportunity, as you just addressed, right? And I think it's an opportunity that is not necessarily being addressed properly by the incumbents, right? Going back to that research that we just published, right? They're not focused on the lower income. Yeah, they may have 98% of the market, but they're going after that higher end market, right? There's still a much larger percent of the population that doesn't have access to mortgages.
Right.
And it's that lower middle income segment of the population. So again, they're hitting spot on, right, on one of the existing opportunities in the market in Mexico and across Latin America. Yep.
Last word, Todd.
Over half the companies were in the infrastructure / embedded / as a service type market. It just shows you how much infrastructure, new age infrastructure is needed across LatAm, whether it be Mexico, Brazil, wherever. So the fact that you just continue to have these early stage companies, there's a lot that's going to change in the next few years.
Yeah. And with that, we will have to call it a day. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. And we'll be back same time next week, 5 p.m. Eastern, for probably a more regular, shall we say, edition of LendIt Fintech News. This was our special LatAm edition. So thanks, Andres. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Andres.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Bye.